Okay, I think we've got a decent cohort of people who have joined us. So thank you very much indeed for doing that, and welcome to this World Tote Association webinar, focusing on the building of relationships and becoming a speaking partner with lawmakers and regulators. As pool operators, we know we've got a very good story to tell when we're engaging with our stakeholders. Our core pool products are different from other gambling products in their risk profile and the corresponding relationships we have with our customers. We don't need customers to lose for us to succeed, and winners are welcome. Building a sustainable and transparent market in which customers can safely enjoy their leisure activities and the underlying sport of horse racing, with which we're intrinsically linked, are common components of our success. But how well are these factors understood by our stakeholders? Perhaps better in some markets than others. Where there's a lot of change in regulation, the introduction of new entrants, different betting models, and different risk profiles, these messages can get lost and benefit from being reiterated. But even in our most established markets, we hear that communicating with clarity and substantiating our messages with the right evidence and the data points is very necessary if we are to ensure that these key differentiators are promoted and preserved. Thinking more broadly, and as these gambling markets become ever more global, we can see that our policymakers and regulators are increasingly looking to their international counterparts for experience and inspiration as they contemplate how global gambling markets should operate and the potential challenges that they pose, whether the customers for whom they are responsible locally should be permitted to participate within such markets. And if they are, how will they ensure that they are not exposed to additional or unknown risks? Product risks, money laundering, player safety, and the wider social impacts of gambling are common themes across all of our markets. And here too, we've got a good story to tell and a strong contribution to make to the discussion. We're already a global network of operators managing a global set of products in a global marketplace. We have commonality of approach and increasing alignment across many of the issues with which our stakeholders are wrestling. And we can therefore add a seasoned and trusted voice to the deliberations and be part of the solutions as they develop. As we're going to hear, our members each have their local issues and stakeholders to manage. We're each facing different practical, political, and socio-economic challenges, but ultimately, many, if not all of them, will be familiar to our member group, and we can bring shared experience and data points to support one another in finding sustainable local options. If we add the combined voice of the World Tote Association as our trade body, we will add greater weight still to those messages. So how should we go about doing this? To start this debate and to prompt some thinking, I'm joined by my four esteemed panelists, each of whom brings their own individual perspective and a wealth of experience and expertise. First, we'll hear the insights of our co-chair at the World Tote Association, Hans Lord Skarploth, on the overarching principles of strong stakeholder management and what he thinks about a case study that he has been developing in his jurisdiction to support his current strategy. We'll then hear the regulator's view from Atle Hamar, Director General of the Norwegian Gaming and Foundation Authority. Atle has vast experience locally and internationally in the regulatory role, but also in his prior roles in government. Our third speaker is Colin Gordon, Chief Operating Officer of 4Racing, for whom we will hear an overview of the challenges facing 4Racing in a frenetic market in South Africa and the stakeholder mapping process he is developing to address that. And finally, we'll hear from Anthony Pickles, Director at the Blakeney Group, who are advisors to industry and governments on corporate strategy, and will give us some observations on what he's heard from other speakers, and then some thoughts on how we might take things forward to bring our experience to bear, and to also bring in experience from other industry sectors. Before I turn over to Hans, I'd like to invite you all to get involved and to participate in the debate if you can. We don't want this to be a talking shop. We would like it to be a discussion. And you can get involved by posting your questions in the chat box at the bottom of your screens. So please do that as we go, and we will address your questions as we go, or alternatively at the Q&A session at the end. So to our first speaker on this topic, let me introduce you again to Hans Lord Skarploth. Hans is the Chief Executive at ATG in Sweden, and of course, better known to all of us as our co-chair here at the World Tote Association. Hans has been enrolled for a considerable amount of time, and then but before that was in industry, particularly in TV communications. So Hans, over to you, and please, will you lead us off?
Thank you, and good morning, everyone. I got some support in flipping slides in the presentation, and I think we could start off with the next slide. For me, being the CEO of ATG, it is equally important with great execution in the market we are in, as being able to affect the market legislation, i.e. to build a market where we have good chances to be successful. And in order to do so, there are two important insights. And the first thing you have to do in order to be able to affect is to identify the stakeholders in the market. Of course, it is the lawmakers, i.e. the politicians. We have the gambling authorities, the health authorities. We pay tax, so tax authorities. An important group is also the gambling addiction associations, of course, competitors, and last but not least, media has an impact of what will happen on the gambling market in Sweden tomorrow. Second insight, which I think is important, is in order to be able to affect, there are three cornerstones that you better be on top of. Number one is trust. In order to change things, you need to build trust with the stakeholders previously shown. And you do that by thinking a little bit bigger than your own commercial interests only. Here in Sweden, we talk about creating a gambling market which is better tomorrow than it is today. And I think that is very important in order to get through with your messages. Second thing is that the market and all the stakeholders, they have a lot of opinions on in which direction should we move. And in order to move from only opinions to something better, i.e. change, you better bring facts to the table. Facts is incredibly important if you would like to change. And last but not least, all over in our world, we are all lazy. So if you would like to make new laws or create changes, you better come with solutions. Concrete solutions on things that you would like to change. That is incredibly important in order to get through. Next slide. So what we have worked with over the last years, or you could call it cases. And let's give you a brief introduction of the Swedish market. We got a license market 2019. Before that, it was a monopoly market with a lot of unlicensed operators acting in the market. The license market include horse betting, sports betting, and casino online. And ATG formerly only doing horse betting are actually now offering all these products. At the time, 2019, it was obvious for everyone that the top priority for our politicians was channelization. They would like to get in control over the gambling market. The issue since then is that there have been no valid measuring of the channelization level here in Sweden since then. There have been some reports, but many of them has been of poor quality, and many of them has been a snapshot of reality, i.e. you are not tracking channelization over time. So we decided, we could take next slide. We decided to create a case in regard to channelization. And what is good with channelization is that it is of interest for all the stakeholders previously shown. Politicians and the gambling authorities would like to be in control of the gambling market, and therefore channelization is important. Health authorities, they want to reduce harmful gambling, good with channelization. Tax authorities would like to get tax on all gambling, i.e. they want all gambling to happen within the licensed market. Gambling Addiction Association, they would like to reduce harmful gambling, and of course the licensed market, there you have a lot of good things to, making it less harmful, while in the unlicensed market you have no security at all. And our competitors, they would like to have fair competition within the licensed market, so it's of interest for them as well. And last but not least, media. They love stories about bad guys, i.e. the unlicensed market. They love stories about bad authority control, and dysfunctional markets also sell. So what is good with channelization is that it's important for more or less all stakeholders. Next slide. So what we did starting 6 months ago was we started a research, you could say, or a tracking. The methodology we used is quite simple. We created a database of all unlicensed sites. We found around 100 here in Sweden, and we start to track visits on a quarterly basis to these sites. 15 years ago, you could get all this data from Google Analytics. Nowadays you can't, but there are service providers out there who could help you out. And with machine learning, you get really good stuff from these service providers on visits per site on these unlicensed sites. And by adding a qualified estimate on the spending on each visit, you could actually find the channelization level in the market. I keep it really, really short. But let's move to the next slide, and you will find our findings. To start with, we could see this is the visits on unlicensed sites here in Sweden, done by Swedes since the licensed market started. And as you could see, it was on a really low level to start with, but the trend is not funny. It's increasing. One small thing which is quite interesting is that mid 2020 until end 2021, we got some extra regulation due to the pandemic. There were limits on deposits, etc., hitting the licensed market. And here you could clearly see that the unlicensed market capitalized on that. It actually quadrupled their visits in just a year. Next slide. Another delivery from our research is that you get the number of visits for all these 100 unlicensed sites. per quarter. So it becomes really concrete. And what is interesting is that our gambling authority has a blacklist where they ban unlicensed sites. And if you match their blacklist with our list of visits, you find that only 1 out of top 20 is banned. Quite embarrassing for our gambling authority. And hopefully this report will change that. Last slide. By adding the spending per visit, we could clearly see the channelization level for different products. Horse betting, here in Sweden, we have close to 100% channelization of horse betting, so it's not a big thing. Sports betting is worse off with like 85% channelization, i.e. 15% goes to the unlicensed operators, while casino is the biggest issue, where we are down to around 60-70% channelization and shrinking quite rapidly as well. Next slide. So with these figures, with these facts, we have done a roadshow to more or less all stakeholders. We have visited the Swedish Parliament and the minister in charge of the gambling market. We have met with our gambling authority. And as I said, it was quite embarrassing for them that they only have banned 1 out of top 20 unlicensed operators. We have talked to health authorities, tax authorities, gambling addiction associations, and the testimonial from them is that 8 out of 10 that comes to them, they do bet on unlicensed sites. It's quite remarkable. And our competitors, they applaud our initiative since hopefully it could lead to more fair competition within the licensed market. We have decided not to go to media yet. I know that they would love this story. But we have said that give it a few months and see what happens. Will the gambling authority start to ban these unlicensed guys or not? Next slide. So I think this is a case. We have several cases like this. What is bad with this case is that it's quite far from our core business, i.e. horse betting. But what is good with the case is that it's relevant for all stakeholders and we build trust. We bring facts to the table. We bring clear solutions, i.e. start hunting these unlicensed operators in order to get the control of the market. And hopefully there will be banned unlicensed partners, but perhaps even more important is that we build trust long-term with more or less all stakeholders. Do I have more, or is or?
You have the floor for as long as you want it, Hans, but we'll stop you there and we'll come back to you, I think, when we get into questions. Absolutely fascinating stuff. I think those core principles are indisputable, really. The need to build that trust and the need to have those fact bases to support the positions. We have a very similar debate ongoing here in the UK around the unofficial and unlicensed gambling operators offering products and services to our customers here. And a lot of it is based on opinion. A lot of the conversation is based still on opinion, that introducing greater controls in licensed markets will push gamblers into the unlicensed market. But as yet, there's very little statistical analysis of that. So following your lead in that direction, I think would be very helpful. So plenty to discuss on that, and I'm sure that the case will be the same in many other jurisdictions too. Let's hear now from the regulator's perspective. Atle Hammer,
Well, do we hear Freddie?
I think he left for a while.
Yeah, I think he left for a while. That's right. he just mentioned my name and then Freddie disappeared. So I think we'll have to wait for the moderator.
Yeah, or you tell your opinion about what I have shown.
I think it was very interesting to listen to your speech, Hans, first of all, because you mentioned how the situation in what we can say, very new regulation in Sweden. You have not been licensed, we have not a licensed model for that many years now, and still you struggle with that many kind of illegal operators. And that means, on the one hand, I think Sweden needs that kind of, tougher regulations that I will come into in my speech, which we have done in Norway to protect the market. But on the other hand, I think it was interesting, all the statistics you had. But could I just ask you one question before I kick off? Because you said how many of the was it 8 of 10 who will also put bets on illegal operators that were also betting on legal operators? Or what was your statistics?
Yeah, the ones going to the searching for help with the gambling addiction association, 8 out of 10, they place their last bet with an unlicensed site. So knowing that whatever we do within the licensed market will not hit these people, because they go to the unlicensed operators. And what I didn't show is that, and I think many countries has this, that you could shut down yourself, the self-exclusion opportunity, which hits all licensed market. The paradox with that is you could shut yourself down as an individual, and you will not be able to place a bet within the licensed market for a year, and you can't change that.
Okay.
But if you a week later realize that, no, I want to bet, then you have to go to the unlicensed market, because there you still could place a bet. But I think Freddie is back.
Freddie is back with, yes. You left for a while, Freddie.
I'm sorry about that, everybody. I thought I was here. I was certainly here, but not with you as well. So thank you very much for stepping into the breach. I was in the midst of introducing you, Atle, but you are a man who needs very little introduction, it seems, and you're already in flow. You've got the international perspective, but also the government experience as well. So tell us how you think about these relationships that we're trying to build, and your views on that.
Thank you very much, Freddie. Well, I'll try to give you some of my perspectives. I am the regulator in Norway, and Norway is one of the very few countries that not have licensed the gambling sector at all. We have still that kind of model which Sweden and Denmark used to have some years ago. Norway and Finland still keeps this shape, with much of the gambling market divided between two kind of companies, Norsk Tipping and Norsk Rikstoto. Norsk Tipping is, by the way, the largest company, about 900 million euro GGR. Norsk Rikstoto about 100 million GGR, and then we have a small market of lotteries and bingo, private operated as well. I think, according to how a regulator would regard the challenges, I think whether you have a monopoly or whether you have a licensed market, you need, in a way, strong public control. You need state-controlled regulation and supervision. That's kind of my most important messages. You need that kind of supervision. And what do that mean according to how do we regulate? I think very much of the discussion among regulators today, and I have for many years been both a board member but also attending the annual International Gambling Regulators conferences where we have a lot of, also working groups, we have a lot of discussions. And we start to more and more to discuss what is social sustainable gambling, what is social acceptable gambling. And I think if the gambling companies are going to survive into a future where you have a kind of sustainable approach, whether you talk about climate or you talk about the general society, the behavior of people, the behavior of civil society, you need to gambling companies need to operate very serious, very responsible, and accept kind of tough regulations to avoid society costs that line. I'll give you an example. What is a licensed company in Sweden and Denmark and UK? Unibet. Still, when they are a licensed company, regulators have to bring the CEO into a meeting and ask, why is it possible for a 20-year young man to lose £275,000 on online odds betting and online casino games on your company's website? How is that possible? And the opinion does not accept these cases anymore. Politicians will not accept those examples anymore, and we have them in Norway as well. So when Unibet are licensed in those companies, they operate and have been operating as an illegal company in Norway for years. So Unibet, Betson, Coolbet, Leo Vegas, they are all unlicensed illegal companies in Norway, but they are legal companies in Sweden and Denmark. And this is why we talk about different methods of regulation. And I'll give you now a list of how I think we should regulate gambling sector. I think only registered game, all bets, all gambling should be registered. It should be possible to track your gambling pattern. It should be possible to have kind of supervision according to very fit and proper quality, good registration system. This is not rocket science. This exists in many places, in many jurisdictions. But anyway, it's an important main principle. And register to play is essential for both responsible gambling, but it also reduces the risk of money laundering. So you have the IML directive, which the gambling sector needs to deal with very seriously, and registered game is a kind of solution to also this kind of questions. And in Norway, Norwegian Rikstoto and Harald Dørum know that very well, has developed a monitoring system adapted to horse betting, so all players are categorized with the risk profiles low, medium, and high risk of problematic play. So you can use that also in kind of supervision and regulation. Then I would raise another very important question, and I've been talking about this internationally for years. Mandatory loss limits. We have implemented mandatory loss limits in Norway. We were the first regulator, I think, to do that for both soccer play and horse play and online casino games and whatever we talk about. We have that kind of maximum loss limit, and it's €2,000, approximately €2,000, a little bit more per month. So this is one key principle, and in my opinion, and I don't think all of you may agree on this, but in my opinion, for 9 out of 10 gamblers, they would accept a mandatory loss limit, because that would be, if you had a mandatory loss limit for a month for a €2,000 mandatory loss limit, it would have been pretty good business for some companies, and it will also be acceptable for the majority in the population, and it would be acceptable for politicians and regulators. And I think according to how big industries on other sectors accept billions of loss of the bottom line to achieve the Paris Agreement's climate goals, it should be that quite easy to talk about mandatory loss limits in gambling regulation. So I think that is something I will continue to talk with, because it will reduce the number of problem gamblers. And then how do we then deal with situations like Hans Gartlöf mentioned, that okay, if you're locked out for a year, excluded and so on, you don't gamble on the licensed regulators. How do you then regulate so they don't go to illegal operators? And I think you need, on the first hand, a payment blocking system. And you need to get that payment blocking system capable to function very efficient and strict. So I would say we have been very successful in Norway according to this, because the payment blocking system is what we regard as our most efficient tool to prevent gambling on illegal website, illegal companies and so on. But then you need a very strong communication and cooperation with banks, finance institution. We have a very good discussion with the Finance Norway, the overall organization for all finance sector. And we also go very tough on third-party companies according to payment. So we regulate that way. The other thing is, it has been quite an interesting story for me to experience how easy it was to get a very good cooperation with big tech. Big, often American, USA-owned global tech social media companies like Facebook, Instagram, YouTube, Google, etc. They work very much with compliance, and they don't accept if we tell them that this kind of advertising is not legal regarded to Norwegian citizens. They block the advertising if we inform them very well. It was very easy to get, for example, a cooperation with Facebook very early. So according to you, Hans's example, you need to have all those regulatory mechanisms in place to avoid illegal gambling and to get your customers to use and spend their gambling money on the legal websites in their country. We also have a kind of upcoming DNS blockation. So payment blocking, communication, payment blocking, advertising, DNS, total. I would say the total effect of those regulatory mechanisms gives us quite a good channelizing effect in Norway. So we see a drop. We see a clear tendency that fewer and fewer Norwegians play abroad on illegal companies, because we are making it tougher for them to make bets and gamble on illegal websites, because it's a kind of tricky to get through the payment systems when we block there. It's kind of tough to get through the DNS blocking. And then we have also a court case now going on with Trannel, which is the owner of Unibet. So we regulate tough in Norway, and we succeed according to channelize Norwegian gamblers to Norwegian regulated games. Besides of that, we are finally, I would mention that we have very good international regulatory cooperation, both in the Game Regulatory European Forum. Actually, we are hosting the conference for European regulators in Bergen in June. this year, and we are also quite active member of the International Association of Gambling Regulators. We have director meetings in Scandinavia, and the last thing I would mention is that there is a rising discussion among regulators, UK, Norway, Netherlands, United States, Canada, to discuss should we establish a practice between regulators that we say there should be a compliance between jurisdictions. So if you have a license in Sweden, you should tell the companies that has got the license in Sweden not to offer games and bets to Norwegian citizens, for example. And I think this is really growing this discussion, and we have, Freddie, a very good dialogue with UK Gambling Commission according to this method that we call compliance between jurisdictions. So I'll stop there, Freddie. I think that is enough for me in the first round. Yes, thank you.
Very, very well done there, Atle, as well, to mention the UK Gambling Commission. I think we have representatives from them actually amongst our listeners today. So a good reference there. Question for you on in relation to pool betting. Do you differentiate pool betting from other forms of betting, fixed odds betting and casino, for example, when you consider the risk profile of the different types of bets?
Yes, if you discuss the risk profile in a kind of, problem gambling perspective, we know which games are more risky than other games, and we can place them in green categories and more red categories if they are in a way more dangerous for players. But still, as long as you regulate with mandatory loss limits, that will reduce the risk anyway.
So that loss limit applies equally across all of the different gambling types, regardless of the risk profile of the product.
In a way, you can say it so. Yes.
Interesting. I think it's definitely one way of doing it. It's not common across the international jurisdictions, but as you say, there's more discussion going on between regulators. So it will undoubtedly be something that's being contemplated, and something we will be looking out for. If I can make a plug for the World Tote Association as well, if you would like a speaker at your international conference, either in Europe or elsewhere, I'm sure we can provide one. So do bear us in mind. Okay, thank you, Atle. We're going to come back to you and invite your comment on other speakers as well. But we're going to turn now to Colin Gordon in South Africa. Colin is the chief executive of 4Racing, and in his career in racing, it's almost quicker to list the things that Colin hasn't actually done than those things that he has. But I'll do a brief summary. He genuinely has been involved in all areas of the sport: handicapping, training, breeding liaison, programming, as well as export and import committees. He's worked as the deputy manager of racing control at the Jockey Club, and he moved to become the general manager at the Racing Association before he arrived at 4Racing. And as we are going to hear, I think 4Racing and that South African market is in a different stage of its life cycle and addressing quite a few of the issues that we all recognize. So Colin, over to you.
Thanks very much, Freddie. I think the main purpose will be to share our experience of engagement with our regulator. We probably haven't scored particularly well if there was a report card, but at least we've learned a lot of how not to do it. And I suppose if we follow that saying, you either win or you you either win or you learn. We will elaborate on what we have learned over this year in the saddle, and then how we will change direction and emphasis. And you'll see from the presentation as we work through it that the main change in direction is to have a bigger focus on what's in it for the regulator. How does all of these matters impact them? What are they losing out on, for example, from an illegal gambling perspective, etc. Just a background for people who aren't aware of the for racing journey and South African racing as a whole. In May 2020, our predecessor Phumelela was placed under business rescue, and it was on the back of an industry facing collapse and demise that for racing stepped in, and our shareholder stepped in. That was in the form of Mary Oppenheimer and Daughters, and the new operator for racing was formed. We still have a strong focus on the Tote and increasing those Tote revenues and creating a sustainable industry. And to do so, obviously, we have to develop strong partnerships with, amongst others, the regulators. Just following on, and I'll make some number of references to Hans's presentation earlier on, and one of those was sort of stakeholder mapping. This effectively is our stakeholder mapping. We in quite a complex local industry whereby we have provincial regulators. Each province has a gambling regulator. We've also got the National Gambling Board. We consist of 3 operators here in South Africa in the form of Gold Circle, Cape Racing, and ourselves as for racing. So we're dealing with 9 provincial gambling boards, and it's complicated enough dealing with a regulator, so you can imagine the task at hand. This is just a brief summary of that legislative environment. We're the largest of the 3 operators. We have licenses in a number of those provinces that are referred to, and those are divided into racecourse licenses. So in the areas in which we operate racecourses, we have the racecourse licenses, and then we obviously have the Tote licenses that are prevalent in all the areas, whether there's a racecourse or not. We also run the For Racing TV, which is the distribution of our channel, and why it's relevant is because we have the complication where racing was a monopoly previously. A number of restrictions or stronger than guidelines, but processes have been imposed upon us in terms of what we can sell that picture for, etc., and how we have to make it available by these gambling boards. I think some of the industry dynamics, which is common to most of you on the call, is the rise of online casinos, and in South Africa, especially by the fixed odds licensees during COVID. So the decrease in Tote revenues was offset and more by these online casinos. And we also have the issue, obviously, and I know Australia grapples with it, of Tote derivatives and open bets that eat into the Tote offering and the tax on that Tote deduction or the Tote takeout. So if we move on to engaging with government, and what we had found is our predecessor had a poor relationship with government, and that obviously impacted upon us stepping into those relationships. There was, and maybe just to be fair to our predecessors, just having a look at some of those factors, there was a historical monopoly. They were not transformed in a South African context, especially. That has a huge bearing on those relationships. there were ongoing disputes with the bookmakers, and the gambling boards were dragged into those disputes between the race operators and the bookmakers around those picture rights and open bets or tote derivatives that I alluded to. So picking up from Hans's earlier slide in terms of the trust and the fact and the solutions, a huge challenge we walked straight into was that there was a significant mistrust that existed. Talking about the transformation, racing is perceived as a white elite sport in this country. The other complication is that our provincial gambling boards and legislators are often subject to political turmoil, not only between whether the party or the governing party in the areas change, but whether the positions that make the appointments change. And so the reason I touch on that is because the education process in terms of what you do and what's required from the relationship is always needing renewal as well. And then again, just that emphasis on that the online casino gaming, both legal and illegal over this period, but from a legal perspective, more than made up for any loss of revenue that they might have felt with a decrease in tote revenues. So what have been those learnings that I referred to earlier is that we need to find a way to effectively tell our story. The jobs that were rescued at the time and the jobs that are at risk from factors such as illegal gambling, etc. We need to better tell our story of how we are transforming our organization and in time, hopefully, the industry. I think what we've attempted to do, but not as well as we need to, is the story of how the industry is funded. We need to simplify that in terms of how each betting rand is spent and divided, etc., and where it goes to and how it is used to create those and sustain those jobs. And then we just have to reinforce that message on a regular basis. And then I think from an illegal gambling perspective, the core focus is going to need to be on what are the various legislators missing out on from a gambling tax perspective. Focus on the illegal gambling because I know it's becoming an increasingly important topic for us and the worldwide over. We've had some assistance or a great deal of assistance from the National Horse Racing Authority, which is our local regulator. That sits at a level between the operators and the gambling boards, so to speak. They are a member of the Asian Racing Federation, and in conjunction with the NHA, we have begun to share the magnitude of the problem with these provincial gambling boards. It's a multi-pronged strategy that's being developed around the impact it has on the tote liquidity. Legal alternatives in terms of products that can be offered to bring some of this illegal gambling would be reserve bank assistance, and again referring to earlier speaker, the regulator Atle, in terms of blocking payments and the likes of that, their assistance is needed and can be used in that regard. And then again, just the emphasis of quantifying the potential revenue that the regulator is missing out on, which obviously in a South African context can go a long way in terms of addressing social needs, etc. Thank you. That's just some of the problems we're facing, and as I say, it ties in with what both Hans and Atle had spoken about earlier.
Colin, thank you very much indeed for that. It is very, very interesting to hear of a jurisdiction in a slightly different stage in its life cycle. And you guys at 4 Racing have clearly got an immense amount of stuff on your plate. But there, once again, as we suspected, there are some very familiar trends that you're wrestling with that I think we'll be able to support. Want to open up the discussion a little bit amongst ourselves before we get on to Anthony with his thoughts thus far. Hans, I think you had a question for Adley that I rather rudely swept over before we got into Colin. So what was on your mind there?
Yeah, I do think it's interesting that Sweden and Norway are neighbors, but we have two completely different market setups. You have a licensed market in Sweden where you strive for channelization into the licensed market, but as I showed, we do have a problem with unlicensed operators. And in Norway, you have a monopoly situation where you also fight the unlicensed market, and quite aggressively, I have to say, after listening to you, Atle. But what I'm scared of with your market is it is like when you go to the Tivoli. I don't know if you have this in other countries, but when I go to Swedish Tivoli, you have these frogs hopping up, and you should you should put them down, but they pop up again. And whether that is an issue or not in Norway, I think channelization gives the answer on that. And what is the channelization level in Norway, and how do you measure that? Is my question.
Yes, we, as I said, we have succeeded in channelization since I think since 2020. We had a peak where the leak of gamblers to abroad illegal companies started to reduce, and we track this, you know, with statistics 4 times a year, where we ask population in Norway, how did you gamble last period? Where did you gamble last period? We also have a kind of research over the years with a 2 or 3 years period where we also can benchmark how this development is going on. And then we also look at how are the different companies doing in their financially reports, and then we manage by methods to take out the revenue or how they have a turnover in Norway recently, and every statistics, every kind of finance information tells us that we channelize better to Norwegian regulated games. But as I say, we have a quite clear message from Norwegian government and parliament that they say we want this model still. There has been different, you know, attempts of trying to open up and get a licensed model like you have in Sweden and Denmark, but still Norwegian politicians do not want and that because we are successful with regulation. And I think, as I said, payment blocking has been our very most efficient tool according to channelize gamblers into what we can call responsible regulated games in Norway with mandatory loss limits. And that's how ministries and governments and parliaments thinks about the Norwegian gambling model.
So if it is 80% in Sweden in terms of turnover, what are your estimates in Norway?
Well, if you say that it's mainly on online casino games and soccer betting, you mainly have a kind of, you know, competition area from abroad. You don't have them on other games that quite much. I would say that Norsk Rikstoto is not that challenged from outside because there are fewer operators out there that really offer horse games, but it's mainly, and we could say from earlier years that Unibet and Betsson and foreign companies, they will have half of the market according to the turnover registered on soccer betting and online casino games. And we see that curve is now peaking downwards. So And that's because it's tougher for Norwegian citizens to play abroad on a legal company. It's because the payment blocking system works. It's tougher because you don't get that advertisements on social media arenas. You don't get that marketing through TV channels because both Discovery channels, Discovery Group and Nent Group, which now is named Play Group, I think, removed their television commercial from Norwegian television. So the whole level of marketing towards Norwegian citizens are very much reduced also. So in a way, my task is to regulate whatever is decided, and we do that as tough as we may do.
Thank you, Atle, and thank you, Hans, for that question. We've got a question that's come in from our participants that I think is probably worth taking now. And for those of you with questions on your mind who are listening in, do get involved, because it's there's plenty to discuss in this area. The question here is, do panelists see a positive relationship between pools commingling and increasing channelization, reducing the black market? What how are we doing from a commingling and increasing that perspective when it comes to those issues? Hans, do you have a view on that?
Yeah, looking at the Swedish market, as I said, we have close to 100% channelization when it comes to horse betting in Sweden. And I think commingling is helping us out, because there are no product being as attractive as a product we offer via commingling. If you take our biggest product, V75, we have a turnover of 10 million euro each Saturday. And then it's really tough. There are no reasons to go to an unlicensed alternative because the product is so good. So I think that is the best defense we could have versus the unlicensed operators.
I think we would say the same here in the UK when we offer our whirlpool events, and the growth in liquidity in the pools, the interest from customers is absolutely phenomenal, and I think that must be having the right impact. It's certainly attracting more customers into the pool betting market. Colin, I don't know whether you're still with us behind your screen there, and whether you've got a view from South Africa. You are. Hello again.
Indeed. Sorry, I was typing an answer to the question at the time, but absolutely. And I think just one of the examples is that larger pools, and especially with the exotic bets, immediately increases the risk of larger payouts to the operators you might be providing, the legal operators who are providing a tote linked payout or tote derivative type of a product.
It's definitely something that we can help with as we grow our commingled pools. Here in the UK, again, we don't have the same sort of statistical analysis that Hans has done on the illegal gambling sites, but what we are seeing is a growth in that, in those, with a doubling of gamblers who were surveyed turning to illegal sites in the last 2 years, from just in excess of 200,000 to over 400,000 now, as we project those figures. Although it is difficult to get trusted statistical data on this, so something that that we should be following you on, I think, Hans, with your analysis that you've been doing over in Sweden. Very interesting stuff.
Just a little comment, Freddie.
Yes, do, Atle, please.
Yes, just a little comment, because when we discuss, for example, Norsk Rikstoto in Norway, they can offer betting for races organized abroad, and this type of game can be played as a joint pool, where stakes from various countries are added together, or they can act in a local Norwegian pool. Besides of that, I would also mention quite interesting fact for you to know that the Norwegian new gambling law also allow Norsk Rikstoto, besides of offering single and multi races, they may also now offer fixed odds.
Very interesting, very interesting. And Atle, it might be for you. I know that we would all say that our links with the horse racing world and the importance of pool betting and the revenues derived from pool betting to the sustainability of the horse racing industry, not just prize money, but the broader industry and the thousands of jobs that go with that. Does that have an impact? And we should be pursuing our commingling opportunities to increase that, should we not?
Yes, I think so. I think I agree on that. I think it's very important that also the horse betting industry goes down the path and discuss what is our sustainable approach. How do we deal with the health of the horses, for example? How do we deal with all the surroundings according to the horse betting and horse racing activity? And for a lot of people, the sport is as valuable for them as the betting part of it. So I think we need to follow that this kind of horse betting activity is very much related to the interests of the sport. And this is also the big challenge, for Norsk Rikstoto and I think other Toto companies around the world, that there are fewer people that are really interested in horse betting according to the reduce of interest in the sports with horses. So I think that's, in a way, you need also some kind of investment in making this both the sports and the games attractive.
Yes, I think it's incumbent upon us to continue to develop our products and the interest in them to pursue that as an objective, because it is massively important. Okay, well, let's come to our final speaker today, who's been waiting patiently in the wings. Anthony Pickles joins us from the Blakeney Group, who are political advisors to both industry and governments alike. They help us here at the UK Tote Group, so I shall be interested in what Ant has to say to the broader community today. But he also brings a huge range of experience from different sectors that Blakeney and Ant has also been involved with, other leisure pursuits, tourism, and so on as well. So a lot to bring to the party. And what have you heard today? And how would you be thinking about helping both our individual members and then the WoTA community as a trade body pursue its objectives here?
Well, thanks very much, Freddie, and thanks very much everybody else for having me along this morning. So it's been a really interesting discussion, and I think a couple of the things that I've picked up on that I'll probably bring out in my own remarks are the comments that Hans made about the ecosystem and some of the solutions that need to be offered up in the right context within those different cornerstones, I think is the word you used to describe it. Atle from the regulator side, talk very much about trust and the need for the public to feel that trust in terms of the supervision that the regulator brings. And from the South African context, from Colin, that use of the word relationships quite often being critical, particularly when the landscape is as complicated as it can be. South Africa sounds almost as complicated as the UK system. Now, lots of the things that I want to talk about myself are obviously in the context of the UK's regulatory environment. And I do have some slides, Florence. I don't know if you're going to put them on the screen for us. Like, if not, I'm very happy to speak without them. I'll just give you a second just in case they're going to pop up magically.
We have Florence in the background. She's organised.
Don't worry if it's problematic, Florence.
Here we are.
Oh, there we go. Perfect. Okay. So before we sort of go into some of the more relevant parts for you, one of the things that I thought might be useful, and this obviously is with a heavy UK bias, is to look at two different case studies of regulation from two other industries in the UK at the moment. So one is how the regulator has really tightened its grip and some of the reasons for that. The other is how the regulator has loosened and possibly what might be behind that. And I think what I'm trying to do here is really to tease out how the relationship between sectors and regulators really matters, and also kind of some of the more underlying aspects to it. So firstly, one of the really interesting ones, the pensions reforms that the UK has brought forward in the last 18 months. Obviously highly complex, highly regulated industry before, but what has happened here is that there's been a series of very high level fraud cases that have driven a kind of consumer demand for political reaction. And politicians have reacted. So there were about 10 years ago, one of the chancellors of the Exchequer, the finance minister here in the UK, brought about one of the more wide-ranging reforms of the pensions industry for some time. And what that led to was a loosening of the oversight that trustees in pension schemes in the UK undertook. And what that meant was that there was an opportunity that presented itself to fraudsters to act. And so the regulator has had to really tighten its grip. As I say, the driving force there was very much the consumer and the consumer reaction to that fraud. The wider policy context perhaps hasn't changed so much, but the regulator has been given the ability to strengthen the tools at its disposal. The second is something that actually I think a lot of you will be aware of no matter where you are, and this is the loosening of regulation around e-scooters. So I actually did go on one myself recently, and they are frankly terrifying. But the situation here in the UK is that e-scooters are actually illegal. But what the government has done is it's listened to this demand from consumers wanting to look at how they might become more of a legally accepted use of transport. And so there's a series of pilots currently underway in the UK at the moment where there's about 20 different towns and cities that are allowing the data and the analysis and the understanding of their use to be built up. And the regulation has effectively been paused in those pilot zones. So if you were to look out the window now, there will be people here in London whizzing about on these things. And actually this is about politicians reacting to a younger demographic calling for a wider change in the highways regulations, which we haven't seen for any sort of new mode of transport, possibly since the motor vehicle came along. So this is quite an interesting one, because what it's showing is that there is an open door to possibly deregulating a new mode of transport, but at the moment it's looking at it through this lens of piloting, and it's about bringing forward sort of solutions, as Hans was talking about before, and possibly that will be built through sort of the lived experience and I suppose the examples that come from the analytics of this pilot. Just on to the next slide then. One of the things that we are talking about here is how complex it is to engage with regulators and what actually drives it. So I think one of the things that I just wanted to tease out from talking about those two examples in the UK was that consumer attitudes are absolutely critical to bringing about any political change. And that's really important when it comes to the regulators and how they operate. So what's happening, as we all know, across the globe at the moment is that jurisdictions do look for best in case examples. They do compare with each other, but underlying that is consumer trends, and consumer trends are absolutely critical to many of the types of regulator that we have in the UK at the moment, all the way from the financial through to the cultural and of course gambling regulation that we're talking about today. And I think that the other point that I think is really critical, and I think Atle might be able to talk to this much more than I can, is that regulators themselves face a huge amount of scrutiny from not just their sectors, but also the expectations that's mounted upon them from politicians and from consumers. And that's really important, because when we think about how we engage and the type of messaging that we need to develop, it's also really, really important to understand where those conflicting demands meet, and how coming forward with solutions and coming forward with a really compelling case is critical to getting this right. And you know, the ecosystem, as Hans was talking about at the very beginning, is complex, but it's not insurpassable in terms of understanding how it all connects. And finally, on my final slide, apologies, Florence, I know you're sort of doing all the work for me. These are sort of the principles that we use quite often through our engagement, obviously with Tote, who we really enjoy working with, but also with lots of other of our clients who work in a space where there is either growing regulation or whether there is regulation that they want to amend. So starting at the end, basically working out what it is, the single point that you want to achieve, and then working your way back from there. That's how we develop our strategies. It's always very much about trying to understand what the reaction is that you want to elicit from those that you're talking to. And how you do that is through a messaging framework that is easily understood and that makes sense to those that you're talking to. Quite often, lots of these regulators and government officials and politicians have got conflicting demands on their time and on their ability to be able to understand a message. So being able to cut through that noise is really, really critical. I mean, we've already talked about the complexity of lots of our different markets. That's no different here. Understanding exactly who it is you're talking to and how they connect is critical. And then, from the e-scooter example, really, it is about building up your case studies, building up the comparisons, building up the case that you can mount. And Freddie will know this very, very well from the legal perspective, but this is becoming more and more critical because as regulators look with skepticism, they want to see a case of evidence built up for them. And leveraging your global voice here is really critical as well. So we have heard today some brilliant examples of what is going on and where we can learn from each other. Nobody has the monopoly on how that is done. And I think that is where the strength of WoTA comes into this, because you have got collectively so much that you can bring to the table in our respective markets. And I think this is where, in terms of the deployment of all of this connecting together, you've got this need for a coalition of support, whether it be from those in the sector, but also those on the consumer lens and on the regulatory lens that can help to bring endorsement. So finding out who your supporter network is in places like Parliament and in government is really, really important because it joins up so well with that consumer voice. And if needed, obviously using our friends in the media to try and amplify and elevate these messages wherever possible. It's something that we try to do in a cautious way, but also in a proactive one, because quite often, we sort of shy away from media thinking that they're only out to get us and to tell stories of bad guys, but actually it is very much about trying to use them to tell a positive story and to understand that politicians and regulators read the media just as much as the consumers and everyone else do. So collectively, those are the principles that we try to bring to our engagement. I've probably spoken far too long, so I will draw my remarks to a close. But thank you very much for including me today, because I've really enjoyed listening to what you've had to say.
And thank you very much indeed. You didn't outstay your welcome remotely, and I think it brings everything we've been talking about this morning very neatly together. We do have to think about what we're trying to achieve, starting at the end, and collating the information that's going to take us to that point, leveraging the opportunities that we have both as individual operators, but together as a trade association with the WoTA Tote Association is hugely important. And I think the point that you make about regulators, we always think about regulators as scrutinizing us. We very rarely, to your point, think about who is scrutinizing the regulator, and whether that is the lawmakers and evaluating how they're performing against the guidelines that they've set out and what was intended with those, and the consumers and consumer groups on the other side. And I thought that's a very, very interesting point. Colin made it earlier in a slightly different way about finding those solutions that are appealing to the regulators as much as they are to us, and a win-win situation all round. But I was going to come back to you, Atle, with that and ask the question of you: is that something that you feel that that you are being scrutinized in the way that you operate? I think you might be on mute.
That's right. Now you can.
Now we can hear you.
I'm online. Well, I would not use that word scrutinize, but still we are under a kind of crossing interests between industries, their politicians, their civil society, and customers there, and we need to be in that crossroads to use regulation, because I regard regulation as a tool to improve the industry to be better. Regulation should improve industries to be better, to be more fit and proper. And I'll give you an example from Australia, because we had the International Gambling Regulators Conference in Melbourne last fall, and I think it was Professor Sally Gainsbury of University of Sydney who told us about how advertising and marketing activity, according to sports and sports betting connected with soccer clubs and all that kind of stuff, increased that much that the commercials, they were dominating every kind of channel that met people in their daily life. And then you get that civil society reaction. It was parents, it was the sport himself. The clubs didn't want to be identified with those gambling companies that were really using the clubs, and they were everywhere every time. So what happened? Well, I don't know if they have implemented a new regulation yet, but they would then try to regulate advertising and marketing activity very much tougher, because it was dominating too much. And if not, the industries are capable to have that kind of insight by themselves. Regulators need to take action. That's what happens. So I think if industries are going to develop according to what I call the social sustainable gambling, they need to be aware of that. They need to be aware of that they can just only keep on with very aggressive marketing being everywhere, every time, because people in general, they won't accept it. And then politicians won't accept this. And then you can get a backlash that is tougher than you expect. So that was also what happened with the Norwegian slot machine market very many years ago. We had Europe's most liberal slot machine market. It was casino in every corner, in every city, everywhere. And it was too much. Industries fought and fought and fought, didn't want to do any kind of new regulation. And then politicians said, we cut the whole thing. Norsk Tipping, get the slot machines finished. That's what happened. So in a way, Anthony, you touched this kind of things very much, and I think this is very important for the industry to understand.
Thank you, Atle. Very, very, very helpful. We're running a little close to time, but I think, Hans, I think you have a question as once again, it might be for Atle, who's doing a lot of the talking today, but for perfectly understandable reasons. Have we covered it, or is it still on your mind?
No, but I'm thinking for myself, I'm trying to design the optimal market here. I don't know whether it's relevant for the subject of today, but I'm strongly believing in licensed markets. If you would like to achieve good channelization, you need a good licensed market. But what is also important is that you have something and someone, a gambling authority, fighting the unlicensed market. And when I listen to Atle, I think he's a world record holder in the frogs. So I think the ideal thing is to have a licensed market and a gambling authority really fighting the unlicensed market. And thanks to our case study, the focus for our politicians as of 2023 is to focus. We haven't had that focus until now. But I strongly believe in a licensed market and a strong gambling authority fighting the unlicensed market. Yeah, that is only my thoughts.
I think we would all agree on that, to be honest. I think the licensed market and the licensing of markets is very necessary. I think that our models fit very, very well within those markets. I think we've heard today the importance of commingling. I think we all agreed on that, on the fact that the increase in commingling, the increase in liquidity in our markets improves our products immeasurably, and we can use the benefit of our models to fight the illegal markets as much as regulators can use their enforcement activities. So the stronger our markets, the better, for sure. Sustainability is also a very strong message that's come through in everybody's presentations today, and it is very much a part of the public consciousness at the moment. The influence that the public has on lawmakers and regulators that Ant was talking about stems very much here in the UK from that sustainability perspective, that safety and security point of view for players. It's something that we can offer. We didn't tease it out as much as perhaps we could have today, but there's more to discuss on the links with horse racing and what more we can do there to develop our messages. But what is clear, it seems to me, is getting those perspectives settled, getting unified around those messages, and then speaking with clarity and consistency to our regulators, I think is going to be very, very important for us as operators and us as the World Tote Association as we move forward with more of this kind of discussion. And as we become more of that global market that regulators are looking at, the world pools that we're operating are a very well organized, very well structured global market. And there is a model there that we can take to regulators to discuss with them and to make sure that they're very comfortable. So I think that there's a lot for us to be doing here at the World Tote, and we'll be talking, I'm sure, much more about that. But we have come to the end of our allotted time today. So thank you very much indeed for everybody who has participated and listened to our 4 expert panelists. Thank you very much indeed to those. Of course, Hans, always great to hear you. I'm sure we'll be hearing you on many webinars in the future, and keep doing what you're doing as our co-chair. It's hugely important stuff. Atle, your regulatory perspective, massively important, and we very much thank you for that. Good luck in your market. It sounds like you've got most things nailed down, and the frog game is definitely not something we'll be playing together in the future. But good luck with it nonetheless. Colin, you've got a lot of plates spinning in South Africa. We're very much on hand to help you with those should you need our assistance as individual operators or as the World Tote Association. So we're looking forward to working together on that. And once again to Anthony, thank you for your contribution there. It's hugely helpful to get these different perspectives, and I think we need to make sure that we are looking for those outside-in points of view as we develop our strategies for engagement with our authorities in each of our jurisdictions. So massively, massively helpful. Finally, can I thank Florence and Harold, who are quietly behind the scenes, making sure that this goes right, and that the slides pop up when they do, that everybody knows where they need to be. Coordinating 5 people in different places in different time zones is massively difficult. So as always, thank you very much indeed to the hard work that you do behind the scenes for our trade association. And with that, I will say cheerio, and see you all at the next WoTA event.